Do you ever feel like you pray and 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 God doesn't hear? You ever feel like you just ask God, please listen to me? And there's no response? You ever feel like you watch these testimonials on television about how I prayed and I got a new car or a new condo, and you feel like, well, what about me? What about me, God? I didn't pray for a new car. I just prayed for enough to make the payment on the old one. What about me, God? If you've done that, you're not alone. If you've cried out at night, where are you, God? And you didn't get an answer, you're not alone. And you're not a heretic. And you're not bound for hell. You're just one of a lot of people who've wondered if God is listening or if God is just absent from your life. The classic book in the Bible that talks about this absence of God is, of course, the book of Job. And if you start reading Job, my goodness, you get kind of sad because it's a tough book. We're going to pick up the story in chapter 30 today. Verse 16, Job is pouring out his soul to God. Now I want you to listen to what he says. And now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Can you hear the passion? God, I'm just gone. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. Maybe that's how you feel. In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. He binds me like the neck of my garment. He throws me in the mud and I'm reduced to dust and ashes. I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. Job's lost his children in a horrible incident. He lost the vast majority of his wealth in one quick blow. He is reduced to a mere shell of whom he was. Now his wife has a suggestion, probably not a helpful one. Job, why don't you just curse God and die? Now, I think Job just took out a big life insurance policy and she's the beneficiary. I don't know what you think, but it sounds pretty suspicious to me. Job, why don't you just curse God and die and, you'll be okay, Job. Trust me. And if that's not helpful enough, then his friends show up. And I use the term friends in quotations. His friends show up and say, well, Job, you know what? The reason God's not listening to you is you're just a sinful guy, Job. What kind of things have you been doing that we don't know about? Because, Job, that's the only reason God wouldn't listen to you is your sins. Now, I hope nobody's ever told you that, but I have heard well-meaning Christian people tell others it's because of some sin in your life that all this is going on. And trust me, that's what these guys tried to say to Job. God says, nah, that's not it. So what do? Jesus himself, in one of the 7 last words from the cross we're going to read in a minute, Jesus endures suffering unspeakable, lashes, curses. His friends, how would you feel if you're on a cross and you look out and you've had 12 guys following you around for some years, and one of them has just sold you down the river for 30 pieces of silver, and the one you call Rock, the one you're going to build on, he bailed and denied you 3 times, and then you look out and the only one there is the one that passes for a teenager and nobody suspects him. That's all you've got. You look out and they're gone. They've run for the hills. Your mother is crying uncontrollably. The the few friends you've got left are just a pittance among a royal crowd of rabble-rousers screaming for your quick and painful death. How would you feel? And then you begin to pray. And you pray with all the passion you've got. And you wonder if it can be any worse. And then the Gospel of Matthew chapter 27 tells us these words. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. And about 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Have you ever wondered? Have you ever wondered if God has forsaken you or forgotten you? Have you ever cried out, God, listen to me, talk to me? And like Job, you say, you just looked at me? If you have, you may be too scared to admit it. Because you may say, a God that seems to be ignoring me might strike me. But that doesn't seem to be the nature of God. In fact, it seems that with these great prophets of God and these great people of God, Job and then David, if you read the book of Psalms, you see how often David seems to just say, please show up. And then you get to Jesus on the cross. You find out that God honors our honesty. So what do we do when we cry out to God and there doesn't seem to be any response? It's just dead silence. What do we do? Let me make a few suggestions this morning that I think are biblical and I think are sound. First of all, when I feel like God is absent, I probably need to check myself first. I probably need to check me and see if I have removed myself from the presence of God. I probably need to talk about, is my prayer life a relationship with God, or is it just a wish list? Is the only time I call God when it's a 911 call? Do I forget God all the times of normalcy when things are humming along, and then all of a sudden I need a quick desperation plea? So I ask myself, do I have a relationship with God or just a wish list? Would I even know if God was absent or present most of the days until I need him? The second idea I want to leave with you is this, that we still need to call on God even if God seems absent. Job's wife has it simple. Curse God and die. His friends, it's all your sin. Job, just pretend God doesn't exist is the more modern solution. Our day, religion is what can I get out of it for me, not what can I give for God. And so that relationship is always a one-way relationship. God, what are you going to do for me? I want you to be Santa Claus all year round. Third idea is I need to be aware. I need to be aware that Jesus did not get yes answers to all of his prayer requests. You know what I mean? You'd figure if anybody's going to get a yes to everybody, it's the guy that's going to die on the cross, wouldn't you? And he prays. And he prays for the disciples. And he prays, Lord, Father, help them see. And where are they on this day? They've run for the hills. They're gone into hiding. They can't stand to be there. Their courage is drained, just gone. Jesus didn't get yes answers to everything he prayed. One of the prayers he prayed not long before he was going to die was this: Lord, Father, I pray that all of my disciples may be one. Everybody unified. My goodness, what does he expect us to do? Give up on our long-held principles that are more important than Christian unity? Look at that. He doesn't get that prayer answered, does he? And now he's on the cross and he says, have you forsaken me? are you, God? Have you forsaken me? You may have said that at night. You may have said that in the emergency room. You may have said that at the funeral home. Where are you, God? What would the world be like if all of us got all of our prayers answered the way we want them? Well, we'd already be out of church because you'd be at lunch. What would it be like if we all got our prayers answered at once? All of us would win Powerball. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. All of us would win Powerball, and we'd all win 12 cents. We'd all drive fancy new cars or have airplanes. What kind of world would it be like if we all got what we want? No team would ever lose. Every game would be a tie. People we really don't know would be elected to office. We'd all be overjoyed, and we'd all be gods. That's what we would all be. So what do we do when God seems absent? One thing, and I wish I had the brilliance to come up with this, but I don't. I read it. I'm going to tell you where I read it. But one thing we can do is this. We can become aware that when God seems absent, God may be preparing us for something better than what we've asked. A man a lot of you have read, a guy named Henry Blackaby wrote these words about the silence of God. We could say the absence of God. The silence of God. And I want you to hear what he wrote. And I'm going to read it a couple of times because I think it's that important. You can respond to the silence of God in two ways. One is for you to go into depression, a sense of guilt, and self-condemnation. Let me let you hear that again. You can respond to the silence of God in two ways. One is for you to go into depression, a sense of guilt, and self-condemnation. I can blame myself. The other response is for you to have an expectation that God is about to bring you a deeper knowledge of himself. Do you hear that? The other response is for you to have an expectation that God is about to bring you to a deeper knowledge of himself. And he concludes, these responses are as different as night and day. So what about those great people of the faith? Those great people of the faith who struggled with the absence of God. Job. If you read the book of Job, you get all the way to the end and you get to chapter 37 and you're about to throw up your hands and give up. And then chapter 38, God begins to talk to Job. And he says, Job, were you there the day I threw the stars into space? Were you there that day, Job? I didn't see you in school that day, Job. Were you there? Were you there the day I created the creatures of the sea, Job? I don't think you made it that day, Job. You see, the story concludes, Job gets everything back, but he gets something more than everything back. He gets a new understanding of God, and he gets a new understanding of hope. David, all throughout those Psalms where he begs God, show up. David ends his life as an old man. And God says that David was a man with all of his sins, all of his foibles. God says David was a man after his own heart. Wouldn't you like it to be said about you? Jesus, that awful moment of abdication of the presence of God on the cross, Jesus, 3 days later, that power of God propels him out of a tomb and into history. But what about us? What about when we feel the absence of God? Well, the Apostle Paul probably suffered as much as anybody in history. shipwrecks, jail, stoning, beating, imprisonment. On and on and on the list goes of what this guy endured for the gospel. And he wrote these words in a chapter that we normally read at weddings, but the end of the passage talks like this. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection. You hear that? Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Remember the guy who wrote that? Remember he said, I have a thorn in my flesh. Remember that? And he said, I prayed 3 times. That's probably not a literal 3. It's probably a symbolic 3. I prayed over and over and over and over and over again. Do you think Paul ever said, where are you, God? I think he did. And what did God tell Paul? My grace will get you through. It didn't say it'll get you all you want, did it? It didn't say you'll get the new car. It said it'll get you through. And through